Alright, so this isn't a Warhammer model, but I think it might be better than any that are currently available. At least for what I wanted, because I've been 3D printing a full Chaos Army, which is weird and plague infested and goes by the name the Dredge. And this big lad right here, well, he's the centerpiece. And what a model to print out to test if the fixes that I had done to my cursed 3D printer actually worked. If you don't know what I'm talking about, well, I basically have been fighting tooth and nail with my Saturn 4 Ultra 16K to get it working the same as all of my other printers. But now that it's fixed, I have to say it is a workhorse. Now, this Knight is pre-supported, so this project was super straightforward. And because it was straightforward, I'm going to try and put as much effort into this centerpiece model to see how good I can actually paint it. One thing that I really want to try and improve this year in my hobbying is my basing. I have come to realize that I can paint my models to the best of my ability, but if the base looks bland, then it brings the whole model down with it. Like this giant orc stompy boy. It doesn't come with a base because it's so big, but I had to print one just to make it less likely to topple over. And I just haven't done anything with it. I think you would agree with me that if this had an epic base, it would make the model look 10 times better. Which is why I'm going to really try this year, and this army project gives me a great chance to do it over all the different base sizes. The Knight's base is 170mm big and in an oval shape. So to start off with, I broke up some corkboard and cut a few bits into thinner sections just to add some randomness to it to make it look more natural. Well, as natural as a world that has a huge machine of death roaming it. I built the Knight around the base, and I kind of messed up here big time. You see, I'm not a stranger to printing and painting Knights. This isn't my first rodeo, and usually what I do to speed up the painting process and make it easier for me is to keep the main body separate from all of the armor panels. This is because then I can just paint the metallic parts without having to worry if it's going to spill onto any of the armor pieces, which are usually painted in the army's color. Well, this time I forgot about the smart choices I could make and decided to glue everything together. Apart from this one shell armor bit on the claw arm, because that makes sense, you know, just in case I really wanted to paint that starfish in great detail. Anyway, I carried on with my plan of self-sabotage and glued the rest of the model together, and what a beauty this is. You can see some white patches in some of the joints, but that's because I started using this super glue activator spray, which is fantastic. I don't know about you, but every now and then, no matter how much glue I put on or how long I hold two pieces together, I will just get parts that won't stick whatsoever. Now, in the past, I have used baking soda, but it leaves like a weird crystal texture that makes the joints look rough, and this stuff works faster and doesn't leave the same texture mess behind. I will say though, I think my tin is meant to have one of those long, thin nozzle things because the spray can go everywhere, and it's probably best to wear gloves when spraying with it. Luckily for me, I hate having my hands on camera, so I'm always wearing gloves. But you might not be as weird as me, so just keep it in mind if you ever get the spray. Which I'll leave a link in the description down below because everybody kept telling me to get this activator spray, but I didn't know which one to get, so I can at least say this one works. Another thing I really want to improve on is painting. Of course, painting. Everybody wants to improve on it. I don't think I'll ever be happy, but maybe there will be a paint job where I just sit back and say, I did that, and have a great sense of satisfaction. But until that day comes, I will keep painting and trying to improve one thing at a time. Because of the scheme I have in mind, the best color for me to base with is actually going to be this purple violet color from Molotov paints. I don't think it's a special primer or anything. It appears to just be normal acrylic paint, so you could probably just use whatever paint you have, like Vallejo or Army Painter, and see if that works. But now that the whole model is purple, I moved on to the next step of my master plan that totally isn't made up as I go. I sprayed turquoise onto all of the armor panels that aren't made out of crab shell. I usually spray this all over the primer layer because that's the color the panels are going to be, but this time I tried to keep that purple coming through in the corners or outer parts just to add some gradient. Like I said, I'm trying to improve something every time. If this works, then great. If not, then I'll make a note and move on. The turquoise is such a nice color by itself, but I decided to take it a step further and spray aqua onto more of the central parts of the panels. Again, thinking about the gradients. I wasn't too sure if this was going to be noticeable because the colors are pretty similar, but maybe that's a good thing and will make it blend in easier. After all the panels are looking beautiful in blue, I decided now would be a good time and potentially ruin parts of them by spraying this bright orange all over the crab shell parts of the model. There are bits of crab coming from some of the panels, like at the thigh and on the shoulders, so I tried my best to not get it onto the panels, but some did sneak its way in there. To keep the potential for overspray of colors I don't want, I then sprayed on some bright green on all of the seaweed kelp stuff tripping down from the model. Is it seaweed or is it gunk? The more I look at it, I think it might actually be gunk. What do you think? So it's almost time to put the airbrush away, but before I do, I had to change the nozzle over to the 0.2mm for the next step. And this is when I somehow managed to stab the airbrush booth off camera and bend the tip of my 0.4mm nozzle. Leave a comment to pay your respects for my bent nozzle that's going into the bin. This is around the time I also found out that Harder and Steenbeck have updated the Evolution airbrush and now it uses 0.45mm nozzle. So that was a nice surprise. I ended up finding one on eBay, which I will say it's probably best to learn from my mistakes and get a couple of spares while they are there. So, with the 0.2mm nozzle installed and my wallet $20 later, I started to spray on the metallic paint to the underbody. Yep, after building up all those gradients on the panels, I decided this would be a good idea. After living so close to the edge, I thought it best to put away the airbrush before I break anything else and got out the brush to do most of the tricky work. If you are new to Chaos Nights and Chaos in general, then strap in because there's one thing Chaos loves and that's trim. And boy oh boy, there's a lot, but thankfully not as much as some other models out there. I painted this with Vallejo copper and thought that I would just pick out some accent areas just to break up all that silver metal look. I don't know about you, but when I started doing this, I thought it was a good idea. But do you ever regret a painting choice midway when you realize that you have added on a solid hour or so of extra work just by painting all of these little bits and pieces? I also realized at this point that my eyes were going cross-eyed from all of the small details and having to focus so much on them, so I broke out a new toy that I bought myself, which are these magnifying glasses, which look as ridiculous as you think to people outside the hobby, which my wife kindly reminded me when she laughed, and who can blame her when it makes your eyes look huge like this. Regardless of my ick-inducing glasses, her words, I wanted to try them out to paint in the silver metals that I couldn't do with the airbrush. And these work fantastic. It didn't take me long either to get used to seeing everything super up close, so I can highly recommend picking up a pair, which again I've linked in the description down below. With the metals done for now, I then broke out the wet palette and started to paint some of the fleshy areas and starfishes with purple speed paint. I also put this on parts where the crab shell is joining with the armor panels. I think at the time I thought it would be like bruised flesh, but this is a giant robot, so it doesn't have any flesh. It was also at this time that I had an image in my head that orange crabs usually have black on the tips of them. So I took some black speed paint and started painting all of the little spiky bits on the shell. After about 20 minutes, I realized that I didn't actually like it, and it didn't look right to me. So it was at this time I looked up pictures of crabs online and found pictures of orange crabs with black on the tips of their claws, which made more sense. So I then broke out the airbrush again and sprayed on orange while trying not to mess up the last 3 or 4 hours of painting. After looking at the orange overspray on the top of the night, I remembered that I didn't really like the lack of a color jump from the turquoise to the aqua, and that it was looking a little too blue. So I got some pale blue from Vallejo's model air range and sprayed it onto the higher areas, and again trying to keep some of that gradient showing through. This is when the night actually started to look good to me. I was breaking out of that ugly duckling stage and moving towards something that to me looks good. The only thing was that the gunky seaweed stuff was very bright green, and in some places I wasn't able to paint with the airbrush. So I used some green speed paint, which I thought would be still light enough based on the label, but it was a lot darker after it dried. I suppose it will add a good mid-tone or base layer to build up from later. There are loads of little barnacles all over this night because the dredge come from a toxic sea world, so I painted the base layer in khaki to build up on later, and there are also a lot of bubbles coming up from the crab shell on this big lad, and I think it would be extra creepy if I painted them as eyes. So I painted them also in khaki as a base color, and then I decided it would be best to highlight them and all of the barnacles now while I was doing them with a little bone white. Because the barnacles are so small, I can just run over the tops of them and it still makes them pop. I also had used that green speed paint from earlier on these tubes sticking out from different places, and I think it's time to try painting them as tubes filled with plaguey goo. I used a quite light green called Goblin Green from Vallejo and painted it on 2/3 of the tubes. I then mixed in some yellow into the green and painted that on the top third of the tube, before adding some white dots, which I used as a way to simulate bubbles inside the tubes by glazing over them with thinned down fluo green. I then put a small dot of white on to the top to make it look like it was reflecting a light source from the sky. For a first attempt at something like this, I think it's a good base for me to improve on with later models. The fluo paint doesn't seem to thin down as much as the paints for glazing, or if it does, it just becomes absolutely transparent. Now I had to finish the mask and its tentacles, so I took some pink paint with some purple paint and thinned it down so I could paint on very thin lines, slowly building up onto each other gradually, moving to more pink. This is currently my favorite way to paint tentacles, but that's because I don't know any other techniques. Is there a better way to do this? I don't know, but hopefully you do. I also used the same pink on the fleshy parts from earlier in the claw, and then done a final highlight layer of pink mixed with mostly flesh paint, and then applied it onto the highest points. I also took this time to clean up the shoulder pad that I had oversprayed the orange on earlier, and then I broke out the oil wash. I am a big fan of oil washes, mostly because of how easy they are to use, and I can't believe that there was a good 6 to 12 month period of my hobby at the start where I thought about using them, but I didn't want to waste the money because I thought it would be too hard to learn. If you feel like that now, then this is your motivation to just grab the starter set and have a go at it. Oil paints are fantastic. Just get them. I then removed the oil washes with just a makeup sponge by itself because I like to use the wash as a filter, as well as making my models look a million times better. One aspect of painting that I really want to get my head around is highlighting, but efficient highlighting, because it's always at this point that I feel like my motivation for painting is gone. I've basically done the whole model. It will look good on the tabletop, and I'm mentally ready to move on to the next model in my backlog. However, I know that highlighting makes the models look so much better, and it probably is worth the extra time. So I edge highlighted the pale blue onto the edges of some of the armor panels, and then, being the lazy man that I am, I then dry brushed on some ice yellow to the crab shell parts. And this worked for a majority of it, but I still did have to edge highlight just a little bit of ice yellow onto some of those parts. I then followed it up with silver on all of the metallics, again just dry brushing it because that's the easiest way. I thought this was me all done, until I looked down at the base and realized that I had forgotten all about the base, just like usual. So I then airbrushed on some different shades of greys to the rocky parts, and then I had a bright idea to try and make this look like the knight is stepping out of the ocean onto some rocks to go inland. And on his way, he's came across a rock pool where all his little crab friends probably live. Except this rock pool is toxic and nothing normal would survive there. So I wanted to use some see-through resin, but I want it to be colored green like slime. I first sprayed some of that bright green from earlier onto the base where the resin will go, and then started to pour and cure this UV resin. I mixed together some PVA glue, baking soda and white paint and dabbed it over the air bubbles that I accidentally made and tried to make it look like sea foam. I gotta be honest, I don't know if I like it, but the resin was making the paint underneath go weird anyway, so I need to rethink the whole thing in the future if I want to do it again. I also brushed on some of the resin to the tentacles and the flesh parts of the claw, the funky seaweed stuff hanging all over him, and the eyes on the crab shell to make them look moist and gross before finishing the claw with some Yoo-hoo glue. Or UHU glue. The weird thing is, as soon as I put the Yoo-hoo glue onto the metals, it turned those bits purple. I don't know if it's just melted through the layers of the paint to the primer level or what has happened, but it looks super weird. This big lad is going to lead my Dredge army on the table, or at least sit on my shelf in the background and look cool beside his brothers. But I don't know what I should try and paint next. So if you have any ideas on what I should print or paint next, then drop them in the comments. Also, if you have your own centerpiece model that you're proud of, show it to me in the private Discord, which you can join by becoming a Patreon or channel member and get access to possibly the best Discord in the universe. It's also a great place to get some motivation for hobby work done, because this night was done during our Mech May event, and for the whole of summer it's all about heresy, so if that's your thing, then come and join us. While you're doing that though, you should probably watch this video next, because the Saturn for Ultra 16K wasn't always a workhorse, and you should know about it before you think about buying one. As always, I just want to thank all my Patreons and channel members for your constant support, because without you, I wouldn't be able to do this month in and month out. So I really appreciate you all, and I'll see you all in the Discord.